Hey guys, welcome to today's live stream. I see there 15 of you on. I'm just hoping that there's not going to be a similar issue to what there was yesterday. Oh, it just happened again. It says an error occurred. Wonder why it's doing it this time. Wonder why it's doing this. It's really strange. Let's see if it's different on my other computer. I wonder if it's because I'm logged in at the same time. I'll be with you guys in a moment. I just want to see if I can try and sort this out. I probably can't, but let's just see. Because I would hate to have to deal with this every single time. Hey, Stephanie. To the minute, yeah. I'm getting better at the timing, but it looks like the other gremlins that are now creeping in. Let's just have a look if I can see it here. I'm having another error, yeah. Yeah, I don't know what's going on. Once again, I've got the same error messages as yesterday. I did turn off or I took off the YouTube on my other PC, and that doesn't seem to have made any difference. I really don't understand what this is all about. There always does seem to be some mystery, and then you solve that, then something else comes up. I've solved the slow mode, but now it's something else. Anyway. Let me first of all greet you guys. Barbara Henninger from Berkeley, hi there. Loris, good to see you. I've got quite a few books here on Everest. I've kind of got them wedged together so I can, but I've got this book, which has kind of got narratives from quite a few authors. And then I've got the Anatoly Boukreev book, Timmy, here. I don't know if you can see that. It's called Above the Clouds. Can you see? And then I've also got, this is obviously Anatoly Boukreev's book, but this book contains several narratives of other authors. And then I've also got After the Wind, Luka Shishka, who is a adventure consultants team member, one of the guys who didn't make it to the top of Everest. And then we really want to juxtapose what Krakauer said about the tent scene on the South Col and what Boukreev said, and then I'm going to leave it to you guys to decide what you think really happened. I do think it's quite a big moment in the story, and it's quite an important moment. I just want to ask for the folks who are patrons on Patreon, how many of you listened to the audiobook of chapter 14? Any of you listened to the chapter 14? I think it was yesterday. Stephanie? Tina Barwick, hi from Lincolnshire. Teresa Moore. Timmy's busy doing something. Okay. Oh, so Stephanie, what did you think of chapter 14? Let me first get your thoughts. Loris, did you also listen to it? Okay. Debbie Hartman, hi from Durban. Okay. Sure, Durban's a lot warmer than it is here. Barbara, okay, I've already said hello to Barbara. Quite a few people from the UK, I see. So, I wrote that chapter easily 5 or 6 years ago, and it's always a nice feeling when you read your own work and you're pleased with it. I've got to say there were a couple of other chapters where I was a bit mystified. I was like, is that it? Or is that all? But I kind of understand I knew when I wrote Everest, I was kind of taking a risk because I was taking a different line to all the other authors. I was being a bit critical and of other journalists as well. And I thought, you can't just jump right in. You've got to go into it gradually. And I think even when I read my own work, I was like, when are you going to get going with what you really want to say here? But I think I felt like one's got to wade gingerly into that water, if you know what I'm talking about. Stephanie says it was a refresher because when we chatted live, I hadn't remembered that, and it made sense and very thought-provoking. So, Stephanie, what to me really stood out with that chapter is it kind of puts in a nutshell Boukreev's argument and Krakauer's argument. I'm not going to repeat it here because it's a little bit complicated, but it repeats the arguments of both climbers and basically shows you in a way how absurd it is. Nicole, I always wonder if there's other people in Lincolnshire that follows these sorts of topics. Interesting. Are there mountains in Lincolnshire? Barbara Henninger, is there trouble with the video? Mine keeps loading. I don't know. Is there trouble? I presume you guys can hear me if you're commenting. I don't know. The thing is, I can't actually see the actual video on my screens. It's just giving me an error message. It's the second time it's happened, so I don't really have experience with it. I wish I could blame Timmy because I sort of feel like it's not my fault. So whose fault is it? You know, I sort of have that feeling. Timmy touched the keyboard, so it's got to be him. But there's an elevated keyboard here on the side that he couldn't have touched, so I really don't know what is going on. Okay, so I'm just going to sort of give some other people a chance to jump on. In the meantime, right now, people are coming down from the summit of Everest right now as we're talking. Today was actually quite a big day, the 23rd of May. So around about 2 weeks after the first summit attempt, there's been another big summit attempt. And I think around about 40 people summited today. So 40 clients summited Everest today. And they were supported by about 67 Sherpas. So that's, you know, over 100 people climbing the mountain today, which isn't really that much compared to the numbers we've seen. I was a little bit surprised that they would even go for it just because the conditions have been not perfect. They haven't been terrible, but they've been, as they say here, blustery. Now, what's really amazing is every year you can kind of follow these teams. It's almost like a moon landing. You can follow these teams going up Everest. Some of them post regularly on social media. One team here, I think it's called Madison. Let me just make sure. I think it's called Madison Mountaineering. You could actually follow like the GPS of where they were. And that's also quite an amazing thing that you can do. I think eventually people are going to be live streaming them summiting Everest, and that's probably going to be pretty incredible. I think they are working on like 5G on the mountain as well. Candy Princeton, 4 a.m. in Southwest Victoria. Heather West, isn't there a COVID outbreak at base camp? Yes, there has been a COVID outbreak. There have been a couple of expeditions that have turned back, but there have also been guys that have gritted their teeth and stuck it out. Stephanie says, please hit the like button to show your support. 2 lives this weekend, 2 very different cases, absolutely. 2 very different cases, although, you know, Barry Morphy has been described as a mountain man. And, well, this is a real mountain. And I don't know whether Barry's the kind of guy who would actually climb mountains. I mean, he might shoot the critters at the bottom of mountains and clear and do landscaping at the bottom of mountains, but I don't know if he would want to climb a mountain. I don't know if he's that kind of dude. Stephanie says that you must share pictures with me on Patreon. I'm trying to think what that was again. Was it some kind of animal? Yeah, this is a real mountain. This is definitely a real mountain. Although what is quite amazing is that mountain in Colorado. What's the name of it again? Something Pikes Peak, I think, is extremely high, and it's really amazing that you can actually drive up that mountain. Well, my voice is really going away. I wonder what's going on. Janae, there was a live yesterday on Barry Morphew dealing with premeditation. So anyway, just coming back to the summit attempt on Everest today, as I say, there were about 40 people who summited, and it says here a similar number is headed up Sunday night for a Monday morning summit. So there are a lot of people coming down the mountain now and a lot of people going up the mountain. I'm talking about the last piece of it. And so this is quite a critical time. It's quite a critical time. It's a dangerous time for a lot of people. We know in the 1996 scenario, Bruce Herod from the South African team died very close to the summit. I think he got tangled in the ropes of the Hillary step. So now is a very critical time. If you're interested in what's happening now, real time, you can head to Alan Arnett's website. It's alanarnett.com, ARNETTE.com, and he always provides coverage of Everest at about this time of the year. He provides names, he provides some links to some of the expeditions, and he, I think he's got quite a lot of experience with climbing himself, so that's always a very good resource to get the sort of live coverage of Everest every year. And so I don't know if there's too much to go through here. He just talks about a Russian outfit, 7 Summits Club, put 7 members and 7 Sherpas on top. They don't mention the Sherpas' names, but they mention the Russians that summited. Then there's Pioneer Everest Expedition, and then it names people from Ukraine, India, Moldova, Ukraine, Morocco, climbing, reaching the summit. Then there's 7 Summits Treks Indian Army team, and then obviously a lot of people from India, despite the coronavirus there. And then there's IMG at 7 summiters, a guy from Sweden, a guy from I think it's perhaps a lady from Tanzania, a guy from Canada, USA, South Africa, and then Nepal. I'm not sure if I think those are mostly Sherpas. And then it refers to Madison Mountaineering, who led the wave, had 14 members supported by 22 Sherpas. And I think they summited at 6:30 in the morning. Now compare that summiting at 6:30 in the morning compared to the Mountain Madness and Adventure Consultants reaching the top like 6 hours later than that. So it just shows you there's been a bit of a change in the way they go about this. The latest summit was 10:10 in the morning. Now it just shows you with Mountain Madness, I think the latest summit was closer to 3 o'clock, 5 hours later. I think Yeah, I mean, I think Bruce Herod summited something like 5 o'clock, which is almost like just before sunset. So like he summits and then the sun goes down and then he died shortly after that. Several Brazilians have summited, so that's basically just recapping what's happening like right now. People summiting Everest right now. And I must say, I actually wanted to go to the Himalayas this year. Also, just wanted to get completely away from the drudgery of the coronavirus and the lethargy and all that. And it seems like a lot of other people had that idea as well, not just walking around the bottom, but getting to the top. And of course, it didn't work out for quite a few people this year. Snowline, if you email me videos, I won't be able to get them. I don't know if you can upload it to Google Drive, if you can try that. Often videos are too big to actually email. Okay, so we're here to talk about the 5 crucial errors that Scott Fischer made. And the interesting part of this is that it's not really dealing with the errors he made on summit day. It's dealing with errors really, really early that compounded themselves, right? And what I find quite interesting with this whole topic, Heather West, thanks very much. You're such a you're as regular as clockwork in a way. So thanks a lot for that. But what I find very interesting with Everest is it does have a similar thing to true crime. It has a similar bearing, meaning issues and problems and tensions and troubles early on, if not properly dealt with, if postponed, if they're not properly sorted out, ironed out, they then come back to haunt you later. And then you are in a much weaker position to resist these problems, and people can lose their lives. And I think you might think, well, not paying your debt or being dishonest with that person, or not sorting out that person who disagreed with you, or not catching up on sleep, or whatever it is, isn't a big deal. And individually, each thing might be small, but added together as things evolve, as these processes build up and come to a head, then there's less and less room to maneuver. And I think that's just true in general with life. You can allow things to snowball, and it starts harmlessly enough. It's one flake of snow, then it's one little snowball, but it can eventually become an avalanche. And, they say, if you can't trust someone with small things, how can you trust them with big things? If you can't deal with small amounts of money, how could you be? It's a similar concept to that, I think. So it's this idea of compounding problems. And I think as a world, we're dealing with that a little bit with things like climate change, and with, I think the coronavirus could theoretically have been sorted out quicker if we didn't allow it to compound. And you start off with something that's quite simple, and then you get variants, and then it's in this country and that one. So, we human beings think we're very clever, but we can create very complicated problems with our supposedly clever attitudes to things. It festers, yeah. So let's get to business, and I'm going to start with these critical or crucial factors. Just go into my. Okay, that's the third critical error. First critical error. So the first critical error from Scott Fischer, from the Mountain Madness side, was the condition of a Sherpa. It was how he dealt with the condition of a Sherpa. Now, I don't think you can give a better example, I don't think you can easily find a better example, whether it's the 1996 Everest disaster or other mountain stories, to say something along the lines that things are going to compound. So in terms of this particular crucial era, it's hard to think of something that can be compounded more than this thing was compounded. And it's not, and I think this also makes it quite difficult to sort of say it's that person's fault or you should have done that. Even in hindsight, it's a little bit difficult to say, well, what should he have done? In any event, the first crucial error had to do with Ngawang Topshare, his Sherpa. And so again, you might say he probably wouldn't have recognized that this was even very important. He may have thought, you know what, this is an issue and I need to deal with it, but I don't think he would have seen it as probably one of the most important things that happened that season for him, right? So what I mean is, I don't think he had any idea that what happened to Ngawang would become this monster that it became. And what I mean is, it started with Fischer himself. This is very important. It starts with Fischer himself as the team leader. He encounters Topshare while he's on his way down from Camp 2. So Fischer's coming down from Camp 2, and Topshare doesn't seem well. So Fischer is on point. He sees what he needs to see. It's not that he doesn't see that. And if he didn't see that, that would be a critical error as well. It would be a crucial mistake if he simply didn't realize that his Sherpa was ill. But this is the thing, is he does see that his Sherpa is ill. He's described as confused and disorientated. So he's sufficiently confused and disorientated that Fischer tells Topshare to go down immediately, right? So Fischer actually does his job. Fischer recognizes what is happening. It's accurate. It was serious enough to respond to. So he's right in what he's seeing. He pays attention. He gives the right instruction. But then what happens? Topshare doesn't listen to him. Topshare disobeys his leader, right? Now you can say, whose fault is that? And you could argue and say, well, that's not Fischer's fault. It's the Sherpa's fault. But you could also argue that Fischer should have followed up. In other words, he told him to go down, and you could sort of say later, an hour later or 2 hours later or that evening, did he find out whether Topshare went down, right? Now, you could sort of say, well, in Fischer's defense, he had other things going on that day. He had other clients to look after. But just think about it in another sense. You're on the mountain all day, and the next day you're going to be on the mountain all day, and the next day you're going to be on the mountain all day. How much can you really be busy with other than mountain stuff and the people that you're with, and you the leader, right? We do know that he was taking photos and he had Sandy Hill Pittman to deal with, which is a different story, but I've identified this as his first crucial error, that he didn't check. So he was right to tell him to go down. He was at least able to see that something was wrong with Topshare, but he didn't check that Topshare went down. So this is the problem. Because Topshare wasn't sort of forced to go down, or Topshare wasn't convinced, and there was that little gap, Topshare took the gap and got himself higher up the mountain, and then that created serious problems, meaning other Sherpas weren't around to help him, and so clients now to help a Sherpa and higher up the mountain. If they'd just gotten Topshare down from where he was, it would have been quicker and simpler, and he probably would have survived. Topshare would probably still be alive. But just from that small little moment, just check, did top share go down? And that's the other thing. You can say, you need to go down. Well, how hard is it to look 5 minutes later, is he going down or not, right? And I can tell you, I went through something like that on Kilimanjaro, where my brother started having serious problems, or it seemed like it. I think he had diarrhea or something like that. And the guides on our group, the local guide said he must go down. And the weird thing was, my brother clearly was in distress, and the guides were saying, you need to go down. And you would imagine, first of all, they know best, and second of all, if you don't listen to them, they've got to pick up the mess. They've got to pick up the pieces. And so in that particular case, my father, I think, overruled it. He basically said, no, look, I'll look after him and he'll be fine. And then everything turned out okay. He climbed up slowly, but he got to the top and he got back down. Now, obviously, Kilimanjaro is not Everest, but I'm just saying, there's an example of a instruction that was cautiously probably correct, but ultimately my brother got to the top of the mountain, no real serious problems, and it took a long time, but he got back down. So you can sort of think that could be the case. On Everest, I don't know whether one can be so loosey-goosey, or even on any mountain. I think it could badly have gone the other way. I want to do another live stream. We'll see how this one goes, but I want to do another live stream on a lady from South Africa. I think her name is Marissa, who was climbing with her Australian husband. And I think they were like 15 minutes from the summit, and she was really, really tired. And then what happened after that? And it's a really heartbreaking story. That happened in 2016. In any event, in terms of Fischer's first critical error, I think, Stephanie, you know what happened next. Top share went higher and higher up the mountain. He got sicker and sicker and sicker. He ultimately never recovered, and it took him months to die, eventually lapsed into a coma. But you had some horrible scenes where they eventually got him a bit lower, and Dr. Ingrid Hunt spent hours performing CPR. I'm not going to go through how grisly that was, but you can imagine if someone's really suffering and there's CPR going on and they're not coming back to life, it can be a pretty gruesome thing. And so ultimately he didn't make it. He had a serious case, and it just shows you even the Sherpas could get it, right? But what that then did was it created an emotional tension amongst everybody. All the Sherpas are aware one of our teammates is down. It's like a soccer team that's lost one of their players, through concussion or something, taken off the field. That's gonna weigh on you. Not only that, the burden now immediately gets greater for all the other Sherpas. And the other thing that was just something that would have an impact that no one can really measure was Nagawang was the Siddhar's uncle. So he was related to the sort of leader of the Sherpa, a young guy, I think he was 23 years old, Lobsang. And so Lobsang, I think, thought, well, you can imagine a young guy like that being shaken by what has happened, but also second guessing himself, also unsure, what is happening? I'm in this leadership position, and my own uncle, who's older than me and more experienced than me, is having these problems. And then also just the simple human thing of worrying about his uncle, and his uncle getting worse and worse and worse. And that is at the back of your mind, right? He's not totally focused on what he's doing. And so that first critical error from Scott Fischer ended up being a very, very expensive error. They also didn't helicopter him out in the beginning. I think he was ultimately evacuated with a helicopter, but not immediately. And so they paid that cost anyway. But if it just checked and made sure, then all of that could have been avoided, and Nagawang probably wouldn't have died, and just a lot of schlep could have been avoided just from that one thing. So that's the first critical error. And if you go back and say, okay, what should Fischer have done differently? It's quite simple. Just make sure that he went down. And it's fairly simple, but in order to make sure, you've got to kind of play policeman. You've kind of got to say, okay, go down. And then the guy says, no, I think I'm fine. No, go down. And then wait and make sure that the guy is going down. And then, but when you turn your back, what's he doing? It's going back up. Now, what is really interesting, and I've posted a link to this on Patreon and also on Twitter. You can go to @CrimeRocket on Twitter. It's the very last interview, or if it's not the last, it's like the second last. It's one of the very last interviews Scott Fischer gave, and it's at base camp, and you actually see Scott Fischer. You hear him talking, which really humanizes him. You also see Rob Hall. There's a little bit of someone's foreign accent talking over that, but what I think is really valuable with that is you actually hear Rob Hall saying, I don't mind being unpopular. I don't mind telling you guys what to do. And what it seems to be implying is that Scott Fischer is a nice guy and he's trying to stay on people's good side. Scott doesn't really want to confront people and tell them what to do. He kind of wants to give them some freedom. And Rob Hall is kind of stopping him, or stopping that, and saying, you know what, I'm gonna be laying down the law. We need to do this and this and that. Now, what I think is very interesting, and it comes across in that 14th chapter of Neverest, is the different climbing styles and the different climbing attitudes of Rob Hall and Scott Fischer. Both of them, some of the most accomplished climbers on the mountain that day. And of course, both of them died. But the one team did much better than the other team. Scott Fischer's team, everyone survived except Scott Fischer. Rob Hall's team, three people died and a fourth came very, very close to dying, right? So one's got to also almost compare the climbing styles of the different teams and look at that and say, how should one climb Everest? How should one deal with uncertainty? How much should you be part of a team, and how much should you be given your own independence? And if you think about it, if something bad happens, a random bad thing happens, a random bad thing that is to some extent anticipated, then should you all just scatter in different directions and figure it out, every man for himself, as in literally every single man for himself? Or should you be a team? Or do you take that team thing to the extreme level and say, well, I'm part of a team, I can't do anything without my leader's permission. My leader's got to tell me what to do. And so if I don't get those instructions, I don't know what to do. That's not a team either. So that was something that was brought up, I think, by Krakauer, that they weren't really allowed to do anything. I think he said something like that they weren't really allowed to do anything without to ask, or something like that, that they couldn't show their own initiative. And the irony of that, of him saying that, of Krakauer himself saying something like, in the adventure consultants in Rob Hall's team, they weren't allowed to show initiative, if I'm understanding correctly, was that, well, Krakauer himself kind of climbed ahead of everyone else. If that was Rob Hall's instruction, well, isn't that what Krakauer ended up doing? And Krakauer came out of the whole thing fine, right? So just to come back to this first critical error, Krakauer says it could have been machismo from top share, thinking, you know what, I'm fine, and also I don't want to have the reputation that, on the 96 expedition, I felt a little bit sick because in 97 they're going to want Sherpas, and if there's a little cross next to my name in that season, people are going to say, where were you? So you've already got that thing is he should be going down. He's not feeling well, but some part of him is fighting to still go on. And as we'll see, it causes problems right across the expedition, to the doctor, to the leader, to clients, just because of this one guy stubbornly, going on. And it can, and this is why I want to talk about the 2016 incident, is edema can be confused with just feeling tired. And that can make it quite confusing, is, if you're very, very sleepy, you might start getting forgetful. It's quite difficult to separate serious edema from someone who's just really, really tired. And, you eventually get symptoms that go beyond that are like slurring, not making any sense, confused, but by then it's too late. So that makes it definitely very difficult. So Topshare kind of didn't think it was a big deal, and maybe he had some experience with it. Maybe he was too competitive to quit. Maybe he was picking up some of the vibe of the whole journalist on the team thing, and he just didn't want to kind of cash in his chips and leave. He wanted to be part of this whole thing. And so in a way, he set the precedent for everything that happened afterwards, because there were other clients as well, and we're going to get to that with the next critical error. There were other clients as well who should also have kind of admitted defeat and just turned around and gone home or gone back to base camp. So if we go to the second critical error, this is really just a short one, and I'm not going to go into this in a lot of detail because it basically corresponds to the first one. It just is dealing with a client. So the second critical error was that Scott Fischer was trying to escort the elder Schooning up the mountain. So what was Scott Fischer? So you might say, okay, in 1996, let's go back to 1996. What's Scott Fischer doing? What is he spending his time doing day after day after day on the mountain? What is he doing? And the answer is he's trying to escort a 68-year-old guy who's kind of going on oxygen every night, like for the whole night. He's using canisters of oxygen, which cost quite a lot. This guy, in order to sleep at night, has got to go onto oxygen, right? And this guy is trying to get the title of the world's oldest to summit Everest. Now, if you succeed in that, well done, great, well done. If you fail, well, the costs are going to be really heavy, and you're going to have this compounding effect. And so what do you think happens? What happens is Scott Fischer is stuck with this guy, and Schooning was quite an accomplished climber. It wasn't as though he was an amateur. But what is happening is you've got the resources of Scott Fischer diverted to Schooning a lot of the time, and as a result, he's not really paying attention to other climbers. He's not with his other climbers, and the other thing is using up his own resources in the sense that. So he's now babysitting this one climber, but then he's got to run back to deal with that or that or that, because wherever Schooning is, none of the other climbers are. And that's the other thing that is, I think, quite cleverly dealt with in chapter 14, is it talks about these wide mismatches. So you have the age of some climbers, old versus young, And then just a lot of other discrepancies. I can't think of all of them. I think some of it was age differences, fitness differences, and then even you could even say to some extent some people were blue collar and others were sort of, from a different social class. And so you kind of got a sense that they didn't actually gel as a team. There were a lot of individuals who didn't like one another. And that is going to make it difficult. If you have a young group, they're going to be more cohesive than an old person and a young person and someone speaking this language and that one, So that is the challenge. How do you get people to become a team when there are these big changes? So now we come to the third critical thing. So I just want to bring it back. If you take the first thing, top share, and you take schooning, all of these things are happening really early on. And it's small little mistakes. You should have just checked what was going on with top share. It doesn't. That snowballs, becomes bigger and bigger and bigger, more and more and more expensive. Exactly the same thing happens with schooning. He's being a good guide. He's chaperoning this guy, but shouldn't he have called time out much earlier with schooning and said, you know what, you're not going to be able to make it. And that's the part we get to with the third error. So I'm just going to read here. Boukreev descended to base camp to recuperate. He showered, read a book, and enjoyed the sunshine. So this is what his other guide's doing while Fischer's sort of chaperoning, his clients. You could actually say, shouldn't Boukreev have done some of this? But he couldn't speak the same language. Was that a mistake? Anyway, so he feels his body responding well. This is Boukreev. He goes down and down and down the mountain, and then encounters Charlotte Fox and her boyfriend Tim Madsen. So you've even got couples on the mountain, so Charlotte Fox and Tim Madsen are in Farish, recovering from, they've had acute mountain sickness. And anyway, so the third error is that Scott Fischer himself wasn't keeping to his own acclimatization schedule. So the leader was violating his own acclimatization schedule. And so what do you think that does to, how can I put it? If the leader is setting the pace, is saying, okay, so I think what I was trying to get at a moment ago is, why was he breaking it? Well, because he was with schooning. But if he was with schooning the whole time, then schooning wasn't acclimatizing either. But you could say that he was doing it more gradually or something. But the thing is, the leader should really be doing everything and his followers following with him. And a really good documentary where you see that happening is on Aconcagua, where you see the guide. Basically, when the guide leaves camp, everyone leaves camp. When the guide comes back, everyone comes back. Everyone is moving as a group. And if you can't stick to that role modeling, then you've fallen out. It's just not going to work, right? So that's quite a simple thing, but in Scott's mind, he's thinking, well, I could get the oldest man in the world up Everest and I'm going to have my name carved in stone that I'm the guy that did that, right? So the fourth critical error, has also got to do with a client. So Fischer confided to Boukreev at one point that cruise and schooning were doing okay. So literally, Fischer is stuck with two of the weakest clients, not just one, two. And he's trying to babysit them, mollycoddle them, help them get to where they want to go. And as I say, you've got this one guy who can't even sleep properly, and that's still really low on the mountain. And then he had another client, Dale Cruz, I think was a dentist, but he was a doctor, Dr. Dale Cruz. And then he'd gotten sick, but then he'd recovered. And so apparently Scott Fischer was relieved. He was relieved this friend of his was recovering. And then he told Boukreev, I'm not going to pull the plug on these guys. So Boukreev was basically saying, are they still good to go? And Scott Fischer was saying, obviously aware that this is risky or difficult getting these particular clients up, basically saying, look, I'm not ready to pull the plug. And I think what he wanted, in order to be popular, but also to be like not the bad guy, was almost waiting for them to pull their own plugs, right? And there's a moment in the documentary on Krakauer where the guide pulls the plug on a client. And I must say it didn't reduce me to tears. I didn't have tears streaming down my face, but I definitely felt really emotional just watching that. I also felt, I think my eyes sort of watered up, but I definitely felt, wow, and this wasn't even a documentary with sound effects. It was just what was happening. And the guide said, this is your personal summit, and I'm calling it on you. And it was happened to all be recorded on camera. The guy was, I think, using a GoPro. And it was just such a sad moment. It was a sad moment that was it for him. But it was also just a sensible moment for everybody else and for him. It was just an important moment. And the guide was there for this client that was struggling, and he was there for the client that wasn't, the clients that were still wanting to get to the top. So as Stephanie says, I love how thoughtfully and firmly he handled it. But you can imagine it's a difficult thing to straddle, being the guy that's going to deliver you to your dream, but also the guy who's going to say no. Not in a nasty way, not in a way like, you know what, this isn't convenient for me, so I'm just going to nip it in the bud. He basically gives you your chance until he knows the moment that's it, right? And so I don't get the feeling that both Scott Fischer or Rob Hall were in that place where they were going to be able to say no. I think on paper, if you'd asked them at base camp, on paper, this is what I've done in the past, yes, but this is different. And even they, I don't think, could have acknowledged to themselves the impacts of the journalists and the impact of the two teams vying for top billing, literally. I don't think they could have admitted to themselves how much was on the line for themselves and kind of in terms of ego. I just don't think that they could admit it. But they could only admit it when it was actually happening, I think. And that's quite a difficult thing to, I don't judge them for that. I think that is just part of human nature. But the fourth critical error was Fischer not pulling the plug, him not saying, okay, you're out of it. And you could even take it further and say, shouldn't he have pulled the plug on another client? I'm not going to say her name, but shouldn't he have pulled, and I'm not sure if she was even a client, but shouldn't he have pulled the plug on someone else who ended up struggling a lot that day? In any event, you were also getting schisms in the group and infighting because some people were saying, where's the Mountain Madness guide? Where are they? The clients are up and down the mountain, who's in control? And so you're going to see how that leads to really serious problems as well. So because of the error that he makes with Top Share, and because of the gossiping that's going on with, I guess, some of his own clients, maybe the clients from Mountain Madness, like, why isn't Scott Fischer with his team? He's with this one guy trailing behind. And so when Dale Cruz quits, Scott Fischer, instead of delegating that to Boukreev or to another Sherpa, he also takes that on. And that then becomes at serious cost to himself. So Scott Fischer's taking the burden of all of this onto himself, but it starts off because he didn't take the burden of it in terms of top share. He didn't make sure that top share went down. And so what does he do? He makes sure that he takes Dale Cruz down, but at the moment that they're doing the summit attempt. And the fact that he hadn't acclimatized himself meant that this was a seriously bad move. Diane says, was everyone there really experienced? I'm not quite sure what you mean. Do you mean everyone from Mountain Madness? Because there was quite a lot of experience. I think Schooning had been on K2. He was a climber with a legacy behind him, but that was quite a while ago, and so he was quite an older climber. What was quite interesting was Schooning had I think his son, there's another Schooning, Clev, who wasn't experienced, but he was quite fit and strong, and he actually climbed quite well. So let's go to the fifth and final critical error. But you notice all of these errors that I'm mentioning happened really early on. It kind of happened in the foothills. It happened in sort of base camp and very, very early on. And so all of that revisited him in terms of him getting sick and being ill, and the fact that Scott Fischer himself climbed behind all of his team. Scott, when they actually climbed the mountain, when they actually summited, Scott Fischer trailed behind all of his climbers. And you would imagine if they climbed together all along, that they would have climbed to the summit all along. And if Scott Fischer couldn't keep up or there's a problem, they would have noticed it. But the fact that they were so used to Scott Fischer just being somewhere else, it wasn't a big deal when you were somewhere else then. And so what happens at the end? They get back to Camp 4 and Scott Fischer never comes back down from the summit. It's the same thing, except from that very, in this extreme situation, you can't have a situation like that. So let's deal with the fifth critical error, the fifth crucial mistake. And once again, we get this insight through Boukreev. He says, as he leaves base camp close to midday. So think about this. On the summit day, Boukreev is first to the top of the mountain, first to the summit of everybody, and is the first back down to Camp 4. But on the day that they started their summit bid from base camp, remember they start their summit bid where the day that they're going to reach the summit, that's from Camp 4 on the South Col. So from base camp, Boukreev leaves last at midday, and he's kind of acting as a sweeper. He's able to climb faster than everyone else, and he's gonna basically deal with stragglers, pick up just people that need help. He's going to kind of push on or whatever. And I was in that situation myself in a mountain bike thing I did a couple of weeks ago. I was I did virtually no training for that, and I had the cheapest bike by far from anyone else, and it broke by the end of it. But the guide for that, the guy in charge of that, also was like a sweeper, and he was quite a strong rider. He would ride with us, and then he would drop back to the very last marker, ride with him for a while, and then sweep, right? And so we had quite a funny relationship, because I would sometimes be right at the back if there were big climbs or biggish climbs, and I would be right in the front if there were if the terrain was a little bit different, and he found this quite weird as the sweeper. But anyway, so Boukreev was kind of doing that, and so as he emerges out of the Khumbu icefall, he sees Fischer helping Dale Cruz. So just think about where we are. He's just come through that horrible, tedious, long section of the Khumbu icefall, Boukreev, when he finds Scott Fischer trying to help Del Cruz start negotiating the Khumbu icefall again, but from the wrong end, from the far end, because he's got to now bring him all the way back. So he's got to go through the Khumbu icefall. This is Scott Fischer. He's got to go through the Khumbu icefall, bring Dale Cruz all the way back to the Khumbu icefall, then go through the Khumbu icefall again, and then after he's summited, come back to the Khumbu icefall again. And the Khumbu icefall is difficult because it's treacherous. It's not just physically demanding. You're not just climbing and so on. The areas where you've got to have your balance, so it's mentally draining. And if you're in there for too long, then you have the scenario where the sides of the mountain, especially in the Coombe, sort of fill up with sun, and it's like you're being sun blasted, just sun on you everywhere. You can actually get hot. You can actually get dehydrated. So that's where Boukreev encounters Scott Fischer, and he's helping his pal, Dale Cruz, Dr. Dale Cruz. And so this was yet another unscheduled descent, and it was right at, like, during the summit bid, basically. So he's making a serious descent in the middle of a summit bid, right? So once again, he's disconnecting from all of his clients, and he takes Dale Cruz all the way back to base camp. He doesn't just take him to base camp, drop him off, and kind of go back. He sort of stays and has a beer, and they sort of he sort of tries to patch over, sorry, it's disappointing you couldn't do your summit bid. And all of this would cost Scott dearly. It was, and you get the sense that Scott, being a nice guy, would cost him dearly. And you have exactly this in Rob Hall. Rob Hall had exactly the same thing that Scott had with Dale Cruz with Doug Hansen. Doug Hansen, I think it was his second or third attempt up Everest. He'd been turned back from the summit he really wasn't far from the summit. The previous year, I think it was, or just previously. And then Timmy is just sleeping down here. I'm not going to disturb him just yet. But out of sympathy for Doug Hansen, Rob Hall broke all of his own rules and then paid the ultimate price. And you could say that is being heroic. You could also say that what Scott Fischer did, helping Dale Cruz, was heroic. And some people would say that. I don't know if you wanted to climb the mountain now, like today, knowing that happened, would you do the same thing again? Like, would you also spend so much time looking after someone? Isn't the best approach, and I'm saying this with compassion and kindness and sympathy, is to say, look, it's not going to work. You're not ready. And I even had that on this mountain biking thing where I wasn't prepared, I wasn't on the right equipment, and I was thinking, I can just make it so easy for myself. I can just get on the sweeper vehicle. But you don't want to do that. But sometimes someone else has got to make that call if you're not going to make it. That's the part that's difficult. It's someone being the villain in someone else's attempt to be a hero. Do you get what I'm saying? But if you just take that whole thing away, don't try and be a hero, and no one is a villain. We're just trying to climb the mountain. Try and keep it like that, then you're going to get it right. Does that make sense? So I think a very interesting, now to me, the value of the Everest disaster isn't saying that person, and put a name there, is guilty, or that person made a mistake and put a name there, or pointing fingers. That's not the point of it. The point of it is to say, look at this really interesting dynamic and the psychology in this situation and how it aggravates and escalates, and then look at how they talk about what they did in a way that's not entirely accurate. And to me, the whole thing is a fascinating study of the science of human nature, of hubris, of how we deal with the problem of heroism in a way that I don't think reflects very well on us. We want to be the heroes of our own story. And so you go up to Everest, you come back, and then you're the hero of your own story, but it turns out your story may not be true or reliable or that heroic after all. And then it takes somebody else to say that. So I think what an interesting question is, why didn't Fischer send Boukreev? So Boukreev encounters Fischer right at the end of the icefall. It's the perfect time just to say, and it would have been a major bummer for Boukreev, but I mean, that's why he's there, to say, dude, we've got a problem with Dale. Can you just take it over? I'm going to deal with other clients. I'm going to go back, sort out the other clients. Bear in mind, at this point, Boukreev is fresh and strong and ready and available and all those things. All Fischer's got to do is say, hey, you take Dale, and it's tough luck, Dale. You go down with Anatoly, and I'm going to head the other way. But he doesn't do that. And why didn't he do that? Why not do something as obvious as that? And some of the possibilities are that Fox and Madsen had guilted him into thinking he wasn't giving his clients adequate personal attention. Fox and Madsen had actually earlier sort of said something along the lines that they want their own summit bid, or they'd understood that on the website, Mountain Madness had said, we will kind of guarantee a guided summit attempt. And what they thought that meant was something like, when I go up to the summit, I'm going to have a guide with me that's going to make sure I get there. And when that person goes up to the summit, they're going to have a guide with me making sure, I get up there. But I don't think what they really imagined it was, well, as the team going up there, you're going to be guided. So it's going to be one summit bid, But they were kind of saying, well, we've had a bit of a run of bad luck. We've gotten a little bit ill. We'd like a second summit bid. And Scott Fischer was basically saying that's not going to happen. And they weren't very happy with that. You also had Lean Gamelgard saying, I want to try climbing Everest without oxygen. And that causing arguments as well. So he had this bickering to deal with. He couldn't rest as well because there's constant bickering. So that's the other thing. I think the other thing with Top Share was, I think Scott Fischer realized I made a mistake with Top Share. I should have made sure with Top Share. I should have taken him down myself, or I should have made sure he went down. And so he compounds the error with Top Share by second guessing himself, but in the wrong way with Dale Cruz. And I always find this so tragic because it happens so often. You learn from your mistake in a way that you compound it, right? So in other words, Scott Fischer is thinking, I made a mistake with Top Share. I should have taken him down myself. And what does he do with Dale Cruz? He takes him down himself, but he shouldn't have done that. So he's misapplying the lesson that he's learning. So Snorky says, I think one of the big mistakes Scott did was allowing Sherpas to summit. Yeah, I see where you're coming from, and I think that the conversation about Scott Fischer summiting as late as he did, and he also had Lobsang with him, I think is a separate conversation. And I think what I wanted to do when I researched this was I sort of felt I don't want to second guess Scott Fischer too much beyond Camp 4 because he was ill, and because it's difficult for anybody, whether you're ill or not. It's difficult to say, well, you should have done that. And so I thought it was just better form, but also, I was also quite surprised that I didn't find two critical errors or three, but I found, especially the one with Dale Cruz was just a crazy thing to be doing under those circumstances. And so, it did. Lean Gamelgard and Anatoly got along quite well, but you also had a weird scenario where both Gamelgard and Pittman thought, we want to climb Everest like Anatoly, both of them. And when you think about Pittman, how she ultimately climbed Everest, and the fact that she was sort of going, I want to follow in Anatoly's footsteps. I want to climb like him. It's ridiculous. But so that was what he was dealing with. And so he was actually second guessing himself, and that was really the situation. So I'm not going to really take it further than that in terms of the five crucial errors from Scott Fischer's side. I am going to now deal with another, what do they call it? Hot potato. What Krakauer said about a particular moment on the South Col after they'd summited, and what Boukreev said about the same thing. And I'm quoting from Krakauer, his words, and I'm quoting from what Anatoly Boukreev said in The Climb, right? Stephanie, what must you ask me? What's that? Robin, is Neverest available in paperback? Robbie, I'm glad you asked that. So what I'm doing is I'm narrating Everest or Neverest now. We're at chapter 14. I think we're around about halfway. As soon as the audiobook is finished, then it'll be available in paperback. So probably this time next month, maybe around about mid-month. So then it should be available. And I intend to bring out the others in paperback as well. Anatoly did a great job managing lean. Okay. So what I think is quite interesting is Gamelgard and Pittman ended up in the same group. So, I don't know if Lean Gamelgard was a lot stronger than Pittman, but I think she had to give up her oxygen for Pittman. So that changes things a little bit. Also, I think the whole group was waiting for Pittman in a way. The whole group was sort of, towards the end, they were moving, and it's like the strength of a chain is as strong as its weakest link. And so they were moving as fast as Pittman was moving to some extent. The icefall just seems incredibly terrifying all by itself, for sure. In fact, a Sherpa has just fallen in the ice in the Khumbu icefall and died, unfortunately. It's just happened now. It happened a few days ago. It's the third casualty this year. So now I'm going to go into this discrepancy between something Krakauer says and something Anatoly Boukreev says, and then we're going to quickly deal with Lukas Shishka. So I actually meant to do this as part of my research for this video. I just didn't quite get around to doing it. I started watching it. I do want to recommend you guys try and watch the movie Everest, made in 2015, directed by Baltazar Kormaker, right? John Krakauer was very unhappy with that film. He's not happy with how he's depicted, and he's not happy that his story, I guess, wasn't chosen as the definitive story. For many years, Into Thin Air has been regarded as the definitive account of the 96 disaster, but Everest, the movie, doesn't. It basically rejects Krakauer's version to some extent. It chooses other versions, not just one book, but several books, which I think is really interesting. And what is also interesting is when they kind of confronted Kormaker with, why didn't you use Krakauer? Why this or why that? Or are you, do you have a bone to pick with Krakauer? Do you blame him for something? And one of the key things that people asked him about, the director, was, there's this dramatization. And as I said, I wanted to actually watch this so I could comment on it. I mean, I did watch the film about 6 years ago, but I was starting to watch it again, meaning to watch this particular scene, but I just never got to it. I'll probably watch it, maybe later tonight or eventually, but because I do want to comment on it, having watched it again recently. But basically, it's a scene where it's after they've summited and Anatoly Boukreev is alerted that there are climbers stranded on the South Col from both teams, I think. And what does he do next? Right? And so what happens is there's sort of a stream of climbers that sort of get saved and get brought into camp. And now it's up to Anatoly to sort of sort out the rest. He must now go out and find these people in kind of a whiteout, in a storm, after he's already summited Everest without oxygen, right? He's got to do that. And there's this weird contradiction here. There's this weird disagreement what actually happened when that happened. Lisa O'Brien, thank you very much. I know Lisa's definitely followed this from New Zealand. There's some very famous mountaineers from New Zealand, Edmund Hillary being one, Rob Hall being another. Rob Hall apparently is a hero in New Zealand. People have disparaged my second book, Neverest, because I don't sort of treat what he did as heroic. I wish he'd made a different decision. And I say that. I don't like it. To me, the test is if you did it again, should you do it exactly the same way? And if you can't, in other words, if it doesn't make sense or whatever, then I don't know if that counts as being heroic. If the best outcome is an outcome that costs you your life, then that I think is heroic, especially in that scenario, right? So this is the scenario. John Krakauer writes in Into Thin Air, Boukreev went from tent to tent trying to find members of other expeditions who might be in a position to offer assistance, although he didn't visit the tent I shared with Hutchison, right? So this is a scenario where Boukreev is activated to go and help his clients. Now, you could say the difference between Krakauer and Boukreev is that it's Boukreev's job is a guide, and Krakauer isn't a guide, so it's not his job. But the other argument is that they both come down almost at the same time. They've both been sitting in camp for hours. They've been resting in camp for hours. What I find a little bit tricksy, just my opinion, is so if Boukreev did come to Krakauer's tent, so if Boukreev did knock on the tent and say, hi, I'm going to go out and look for clients from your team. Do you want to come with? Right? So if that did happen, what would they have said? So what the impression I'm getting is that they're saying that didn't happen. He didn't knock on the tent. Obviously, it wouldn't have made that sound, but he didn't ask them directly. So they were under no obligation to either reply or to do anything, because you must ask me, kind of thing. But what it seems to be to me, and I could be wrong, it seems to be a bit of hand wringing. He said that he asked us, but he didn't. And it's possible that he didn't. It's possible that he didn't go to the tent that Krakauer was in, or the tent that Hutchison was in. It would be interesting to hear what Hutchison says, because Hutchison also says that Krakauer described him as I think an amateur climber, and he was actually quite an experienced climber, and he had to deal with what Krakauer had written about him that he didn't feel was accurate. This is about him, right? So let's assume that this is true, let's assume that Krakauer wasn't directly asked by Boukreev, can you come and help me find your teammates and my teammates, right? Let's assume that. Now we go to what he says, Boukreev, right? And I'm quoting now from Into the Wind. Sorry, not Into the Wind. After the Wind. It's like Into Thin Air, After the Wind. I'm quoting from The Climb, and this comes from, although I'm quoting from The Climb, I don't have The Climb itself here. I've got this book, Epics on Everest, and this book is quoting from The Climb. I don't know if you can see there. Oh, hang on, that was Mike Groom, Sheer Will. This is quoting from The Climb. And that's also really fascinating, is you don't hear much from Mike Groom, except in this particular book. So this is The Climb, Anatoly Boukreev, and it's page 309. He basically just says, Pemba, you need to find for me oxygen. I will go for another tent. For Rob Hall's tent, maybe somebody will help me. So Anatoly's position is he's now going to go and try and find Lean Gamelgard, Beck Weathers, and Yasuko Number. So if I understand correctly, they are the three climbers that are missing, right? So one climber from Mountain Madness, that's Anatoly's team, and Lean Gamelgard is his teammate, I guess. And then Beck Weathers and Yasuko Number from Mountain Madness, they're from somebody else's team. So he's going out to recover three climbers, and one of them is a fellow teammate, right? Lean Gamelgard, the Danish climber. And so he's got every right to go to adventure consultants and say, guys, two of your climbers are out there. Do you want to come with me? Because I'm one person going to be able to bring three people in. Does someone from your team want to come with me, right? And so he says, I will go for another tent. He says this to Pemba. Now, if you're a lawyer and you put this on trial, you said, Krakauer says that no one ever knocked on the tent or no one asked me. If this was on trial, what you could do is you could say, okay, somebody is probably not telling the truth, or whatever the truth is something else and we need to find out. So you could say, okay, let's put Pemba on trial. Let's put the Sherpa on trial and say, okay, Pemba, did Anatoly say, okay, have you got oxygen? Did that happen? Pemba might say, no, he never did that. Or Pemba might say, yes, he did. He came to my tent, and it would make sense. It would make sense that the head guide would go to the other Sherpas and ask for oxygen and ask for resources, right? And then he goes to Rob Horst, and it would also make complete sense when there's a huddle of three climbers and two of them are from another team, that you would go to the other team and say, that's what's going on. It would just make complete sense. So for him not to do that wouldn't make sense. Does that make sense? So, Loris, thanks very much. Appreciate that. So he says, I go inside and maybe another camp for Rob Hall's expedition, open one door, and I try. Hey, somebody, can you help me? No answer. I say, Yasuko Number, Beck Weathers need helping. Somebody, are you ready to help me? What he's narrating, and not very clearly, but clearly enough, is he's saying, I went to a tent, I said who was missing, I said their names, and I asked for help. Then I didn't get any answer. Then I went to another tent, did the same thing, didn't get any answer. Then I went to another tent, did the same thing, didn't get any answer, right? Now you could say, did he see these people face to face? Did they misunderstand him? But this is the part that is so ridiculous. if you are from a particular team in that situation, and I'm going to deal with this practically through Lou Kosciuszka's book, because Lou was part of Adventure Consultants, right? If you are part of that team, how on earth are you not going to know that your teammates aren't there? So in other words, you're in your tent and someone is coming to you from another expedition and they've got to tell you that someone from your expedition isn't there. Didn't you know that? In other words, must someone tell you that someone in your expedition is in trouble? Because did you not know that? You might say, yeah, maybe they didn't know. Well, they do have radios, and also it's quite a simple thing. This particular tent belongs to that particular person or group. Is everyone in that group there? Are there 3 people in that 3-man tent? And these tents are right next to each other. Here's another tent with 3 people in it. Are all the people in that tent? If they're not in that tent, well then, where are they? And if you're in the tent and those people aren't there, what you're going to do, right? And so the whole notion that, oh, I didn't know, Anatoly didn't knock on my tent door, so I didn't know that my teammates were in trouble. Well, it wasn't just them that were in trouble. It was Doug Hansen, Rob Hall, Andy Harris, and on and on and on. Didn't you know that any of your teammates were in trouble? Didn't you think that any of your teammates were in trouble? Well, what else did you have to do? What else did you have to do when these hours were going by when you were stuck in the tent? Because that's the situation they were in. They were trapped in their tents at Camp 4 on the South Col. Now, I've gotten some criticism where people say, well, you don't understand. You weren't there. You don't know what it's like being on the death zone. True, but you do know what it's like because of this, because of people writing books. Not just one book, but this book and this book and this book and another book and another book and another book, and they are telling you what is happening. So I don't know how on earth you can say you don't know what it's like because you've got all these accounts. If you're saying you don't know what it's like because you don't know what it's like not to have oxygen, but they did have oxygen at Camp 4. They did have relative shelter there. And it's not like their fellow climber is stranded out of reach because someone has just come into camp. It's not as though they don't know the situation. There's someone there to tell them the situation. So he goes on to say, I say, Yasuka number, Beck Weathers need helping. Are you ready to help me? No answer. Another tent, same. Another tent, same. And so what he's saying is that he must have gone into at least 3 tents where he asked for help and he says he got no answer. Now, I don't really know what that means. Does it mean they just ignored him? Does it mean that the answer was, sorry, I'm not going to help you? Or did someone answer in the negative, or did were they kind of on mute, right? And then he says, I saw some Sherpa's tents of Rob Hall. I open and somebody talk with me and I say, Yasuka number. And so this is where he acknowledges that someone does talk to him. So he does have a conversation. He doesn't say who that somebody is, but he says, Yasuka number and Beck Weathers need help. Some power from your expedition go together with me for our clients. And then after that, he goes to the Taiwanese tents, and there's also no answer. So you kind of get the impression that he must have gone to 4 or 5 tents, and there was just no one prepared to go with him or help him. And so at the bottom of this section, it refers to Rob Hall's expedition members were either asleep, unable or unwilling to lend support to Boukreev's effort. So just think about what we're saying there. They're either sleeping, bear in mind some of them have just summited Everest, they're tired, but you can't, it's not like you come back from Everest, you lie down on a bed and you sleep through the night. when I climb Kilimanjaro, you start the summit bit at 1 o'clock in the morning. I don't know if I got any sleep before that. I don't know if I was snoring and sleeping. You sort of semi-awake. You nod off a little bit here and there. So them coming back from Everest, not as though they come back and they're snoring and they have this peaceful sleep. It's, the wind is thundering. It's like a machine gun against their tent. And it's not like they are just recuperating and there's nothing else to do. That they're sitting there shivering, talking to one another, eating, drinking tea, and what else could you do? Well, there's a teammate of yours just outside the tent. It's about 10 minutes walk through the wind. Do you want to try and? Is there anyone who's available to go and find them? Now, bear in mind. You might say someone who summited Everest is strong enough to try and help them, or you could say someone who didn't summit Everest, whether it's a Sherpa or a client, has got more energy available to just go down there and help that person out. And so on page 309 of this particular narrative, and this comes from the climb, it says, one of the teammates, Lukas Shishka, was totally incapacitated, still snowblind, still alone in his tent. His tent mates, Andy Harris, Beck Weathers, and Doug Hansen, as of 1 a.m., still had not returned to Camp 4. So this is my question. You've got a guy who's alone in his tent. His 3 tent mates aren't there. What does he do? And the impression I get is that he does nothing. The impression I get is 3 of this guy's teammates aren't there and he doesn't do anything. Why? Because he's incapacitated. Incapacitated from what? Is he injured? Is he snowblind? But then at what time, if he didn't summit, did he get back to camp? How could he be snowblind? And if he was snowblind, was the snowblindness still there when he kind of climbed down the mountain? And I think the best person to address this is Lukas Shishka. And so we go to his book. We go to his book. This is After the Wind. And we go to chapter 31. And it's page 223, and I'm going to go backwards in time shortly, but he says the following. Now, bear in mind, John Krakauer was saying that Stuart Hutchison and him never heard Boukreev kind of knock on their tent and say, "Can you help us?" So I don't know. I guess they didn't know. They didn't know some of their teammates needed help. Now, listen to this, and I'm quoting from Kashishka's book. He talks about Stu Hutchison unzipping his tent and then quickly crawls inside. Now Stu Hutchison isn't a tent member of Lukas Shishka's tent, right? So you having someone from another tent from Adventure Consultants leave his tent and go into another person's tent. In other words, there's an exchange of information, there's an exchange of people mixing with one another. And what happens when they mix with one another? They find out what is happening. They find out, so for example, Lou's teammates are Beck Weathers, he's not in the tent. So if Stu Hutchinson goes into Lou's tent and he sees Beck's not there, it means Beck's probably in trouble, right? And he was. So he says that he could understand Stu's voice. He said there was no mistaking his deep voice. So he can hear Stu, and could he not hear Boukreev? He says, Stu says, "How are you doing, Lou?" And so he said, "I came to see if you made it back." So Stu comes to see if Lou made it back, and Lou did make it back, but Beck Weathers didn't. And so what this is suggesting is that Stu had to have known that Beck Weathers didn't come back. And so it's difficult to know exactly what time this is, but when Boukreev knocked on the tent door, obviously not literally, didn't Stu kind of already know? Wasn't like, yes, we know that they're not back. And if they knew they weren't back, had they already decided, well, it's tough, we're not going out there, right? And I'm going to come back to that in a second. So it's almost like they already knew what Boukreev had just found out, and all they had to do was acknowledge and say that, but they don't. And then it says, and listen to this. This is quoting again from After the Wind by Luke Kosciuszko. Quote, until that time, the idea that some of the other climbers were in serious trouble, missing or dead, had not entered my mind. So you, on a tent in the South Col, on the South Col, Camp 4, in the death zone, it's called the death zone, and your tent buddies aren't there with you. Let me just say that again. Let me just quote it again. Until that time, until Stu comes into his tent to check on him, I came to see if you made it back. Until that time, the idea that some of the others were in serious trouble, missing or dead, had not entered my mind. You back into your tent, but no one else is, and time sort of going by, and you don't think, I wonder where everyone else is, and we're climbing Everest and we're in the death zone, and a storm has moved in. He says I was too focused on myself. He was focused on the wind, the rage of the wind. I knew that my teammates weren't there. He says he was cold and thirsty. He was snowblind. He said the wind was trying to kill him. He says, I'm snowblind. No one's here. He wants to know, where's Beck? Where's Andy and Doug? He doesn't go to Stu's tent and say, they're not here. Stu's got to come to him. And the reason he doesn't know anything apparently is that he's snowblind, which is the same thing that Beck Weathers apparently was, snowblind. So if you're snowblind, you don't really need to talk to anyone, you out of the game. You're snowblind, it's out, right? And not only that, because you're snowblind, it doesn't even enter your mind what could be happening with someone else. So when you're sitting there in your tent and you can't see anything, and there's no one to talk to, and you're in the death zone, doesn't it occur to you, where's everybody else? Where are my teammates that I've been climbing with for weeks? He goes on to say that Stu was confident my condition would improve in 24 hours. And so obviously when it's time to leave, then the snow blindness seems to be gone, and then he just walks down the mountain. The other part that I want to just refer to here, I don't know if I've actually got it. But he talks about, this is a little bit going off the subject matter that I want to be talking about here, but what Kosciuszko talks about that really changes the whole dimension in a way is he talks about all of them were climbing. This is on summit day. All of them were climbing, and then everything stopped. And it stopped for something like 2 hours. Now, bear in mind, the first people to reach the summit was about 1 p.m., just after 1 p.m., which means they were very close to the summit, but not moving, stalled at 11, right? So they're high up on Everest, and then at 11, they just stop. And the reason they'd stopped was apparently Ang Dorje, Hall's team Sherpa, was sort of, I think he was waiting for Lobsang to help him fix the ropes. And Lobsang, of course, was at the other end of the chain of climbers, short roping Sandy Hill Pittman. And I think Ang Dorje's attitude was, It's not fair. I'm not going to do this myself. If I'm not going to get help, I'm not going to do it, which is fair, but it is also imperiling everybody. And so what eventually happens, and this also just shows lack of communication. Ang Dorje sort of stops, everyone stops behind him, and then they sort of wait, and then nothing happens. No one catches up really, and nothing really happens. And then eventually Mountain Madness sort of pitch up, and Neil Beidelman and the Fischer team ask him eventually, like, Ang Dorje, are you going to fix the rope? And he says, no, I'm not going to fix the rope. Well, great. It's taken almost like 2 hours just to reach that point. Oh, so that's why we're all waiting here. That's why we're all sitting here, because you're not going to fix the rope. And so who is going to fix the rope? So guess what happens? I think it was Anatoly Boukreev, and I think part of the problem for Ang Dorje was, I say this under correction, but I think part of Ang Dorje's problem was he didn't actually have enough rope with him, or he didn't have rope with him. And I think some of the other climbers just didn't realize it. They didn't realize they needed this new rope. And I think there was rope, but Lobsang had it or something like that. And I think the person who then solved the problem was Anatoly Boukreev. He basically just put his hands into the snow, pulled out old rope, and they used the old rope to fix the rope to the summit. Now, that is a little bit risky. It's a little bit risky not using brand new rope, but it's not unheard of. And so, yeah, you've got an experienced mountaineer basically just solving the question like this. So he basically, this is Lucas Shishka saying on page 184, no new rope was ever needed or fixed on the traverse, meaning this long wait of 2 hours to get new rope that stalled everything, that delayed everything by 2 hours. It didn't make any difference in the end because they never used new rope. He says, all that waiting was for nothing, 2 hours lost for nothing. He says, Anatoly just reached down, pulled up old rope that was buried in the snow. And the climbers then followed using the old rope. So Anatoly basically solved that problem as well for everybody. He basically just sorted everything out, and there were no casualties because of that as far as we know. But how is that for a kind of a turn of events? Now, what I think is interesting is in the movie Everest, Cormaker decides to dramatize the moment that Boukreev kind of reaches Krakauer's tent and says, hey, 2 of your teammates are out there. Do you want to help me try and get to them? And bear in mind that Boukreev goes out there alone anyway and saves 2 of them. He saves Leen Gamelgaard and he saves, he saves 1 of them. He saves Leen Gamelgaard. And Beck Weathers is left for dead, who he blames on Boukreev. Beck Weathers basically blames Boukreev for what happened to him. He doesn't seem to blame his teammates, who I don't know whether he assumes they just didn't know. I don't know if that's the assumption. But Yasuko Number ultimately dies, and it's not as though his teammates didn't know. Boukreev was telling them, your teammate's out there, and at that point she was alive. And the part that is kind of unfathomable is that they actually decided that they took a vote. So, if you say, I didn't know that they were in trouble, the guy that wanted help, I didn't hear that he needed help, so I didn't know. But it turns out that they actually took a vote. They voted not to, they voted whether or not to help Beck and Yasuka. And I think that vote happened the next morning when, and this is the part that is crazy, they got some Sherpas together. At this point, they seem to have realized, okay, these people didn't come back to camp. They got some Sherpas together and they said, can you guys go out and see if you find anyone, right? It's like, the whole point of it is we're gonna launch, or we're gonna set up a rescue operation. That's what this is about. It's the next morning. People haven't come back to camp. We're gonna start a rescue operation. So what we need to know is who's out there, who can be rescued, right? This is the crazy part. So the Sherpas go out and they come back and they say, we found 2 people, they're just over there. Are they alive? Yes, but barely. So the Sherpas have come back finding survivors. And I mean, the whole point of the rescue operation was to rescue people. Now they've found survivors. So what does adventure consultants do? So now there's no more storm, there's no more darkness, there's no more we sleeping in our tents. It's now the next day. When I say there's no more storm, I'm not saying there's absolutely no wind. I'm just saying you can't now say it's nighttime, I'm bewildered, I'm sleeping, I'm tired. It's basically the next day. What are you going to do this day that you've got? You've done the summit part. You can't really go down now because of the conditions. What are you going to do today? So what they decide is they're not going to help them, that they're basically beyond help, right? And the impression I get, and I could be wrong here, I'm a little bit rusty with my memory. Stephanie can probably set me straight here. As far as I know, the clients themselves never went out to where Beck and Yasuka were. In other words, they themselves didn't walk there themselves and inspect kind of the scene. Is that right, Stephanie? So they've got nothing else to do. They're there on Camp 4. They've got the hours and hours that can go by. At this point, they're probably aware that Rob Hall is in trouble and Scott Fischer's in trouble. And what they can do is sort out climbers that are much closer to them. But are they going to do that? And instead, what they somehow decide is between all of them, they decide to take a vote without even going to the trouble to walk to where their fellow climbers are. And it's not, they don't need to go up. They just need to go that way. They just need to go a little bit that way on basically level ground on the saddle of the South Col. They just need to go there and see those climbers for themselves who are still alive. We know for a fact that Beck Weathers was still alive because he ultimately found his own way back into camp. And this is the other part that's a bit odd. If Beck Weathers was snowblind, how was he able to see his way back into camp? And that's something that I did look at, is where he talks about what he saw. And he does say that it was fuzzy, but he certainly wasn't snowblind to the extent that he was blind. He was snowblind to the extent that he was nevertheless able to save himself, right? In any event, they are wrong in their vote. They vote that Beck isn't strong enough to survive, so we're gonna abandon him. And they are proved wrong by the fact that Beck Weathers ultimately saved himself. Beck Weathers is just around the corner, stumbles into camp, saves himself. I think they put him in a sleeping bag or something, and he's given tea, but guess what happens? They kind of abandon him again, in the sense that he's later on is in the tent, is screaming. I think he was in Scott Fischer's tent, and both ends had blown out, and the sleeping bag had sort of blown over his head. And someone looked at the tent and said, "Wow," or thought, "Wow, I think there's a dead person in there," because they saw, like when someone dies, you cover over their face. They saw someone lying in there, but the sleeping bag over their face. And so now it was a case that someone's just over there in the tent right there. And are you not going to just go and check, is that person alive or not? The person's in the tent. And so they didn't do that either. And eventually how it ended was, I think the climbers got the call, okay guys, we are going to Camp 3, in 20 minutes be ready. And then suddenly everyone's ready. Now there's no snow blindness. Now no one's incapacitated. Now no one's got sleep problems or whatever. Now no one has a problem hearing. Suddenly everyone's ready to go down. And I think while they're in the while they busy in the process of starting to go down to Camp 3, guess who they see? Beck Weathers. And so Beck Weathers was sort of abandoned twice. I'm not saying Beck Weathers was the best climber, or but it shows that he was viable despite what his teammates decided. Do you know what I mean? His teammates were wrong multiple times. And so the part that I find a little bit maybe disingenuous is those climbers that abandoned him, did they add that to their stories? So when Beck Weathers' teammates wrote their books and gave their speeches, did they say, you know what, Beck Weathers, sorry, we actually just made a decision about you? Are they forthcoming about that? And if they are, great, it's fine. And you probably don't want to be too forthcoming about it because it might make world headlines because you've got journalists with you. But the other side of it is, if you're not forthcoming about it and your story is about you summited Everest and it's Anatoly Boukreev's fault for not using oxygen, is he really the villain of the story? Is he really the villain of this story? Is he? He went out. I mean, he went out and he saved, he helped Lean Gamelgard. I think he actually also helped, I'm not sure who helped Tim Madsen and Charlotte Fox. I think that may have been the other guide, but he saved at least one of the climbers that were out there in the middle of the night without anyone's help. And he felt so bad about Isuka Number that I think he visited her remains the following year. Did some of the other guides do that? Did some of the other clients do that? So that part I found particularly appalling, was not just the voting, not we're unaware of what's going on, but voting. But this is the other part, that there were doctors that were part of those guys voting. Stuart Hutchinson, as far as I know, I'm not sure if he's a vet or a doctor because some of them were, but he was a doctor. I think John Task, wasn't he a doctor as well, Stephanie? So you've got doctors part of this vote. Totally saved Fox, Madsen and Pittman. I know that he saved Pittman. Just trying to think who Mike Groom and Beetleman saved. It gets quite complicated. But, you must bear in mind, as soon as Beetleman and Groom arrived at Camp 4, you can't tell me that anybody didn't know what was going on, because the guides are now back and there was a whole of clients missing, right? So pleading ignorance doesn't really work in the story, and yet that's what we seem to be told. I mean, I told you that Lucas Schuska said, let me go back to it. Lucas Schuska says, I didn't know, what does he say? It's so weird, you read some of this, and then when you get other context, then when you come back and read it again, it doesn't seem to make any sense. You've got to second guess it to actually get the real story. And the interesting thing with Kosciuszko's account is he only talks about all of this stuff at the very end of his book, after he's spoken about. So he says at this point in the book, it's page 223 of page 305. He says, until that time, the idea that some of the other climbers were in serious trouble had not entered my mind. And if I had to interview some of these people, I would say, at what time were you aware that that Beck Weathers was in trouble, that person or that person. And they'd probably say, no, I couldn't tell you at what time. But then I would say, okay, in the evening or in the morning, whatever. And then, okay, so then you knew from this point onwards, what did you do? And the answer would be that they ultimately never did anything. Once they knew, they didn't do anything. And I think that is the part of the story that isn't a disaster, it's a tragedy. And you can't explain it away by saying it's the death zone or it's on Everest, it's each one to himself. I don't think you can do that. I don't know if you can write a book and still claim hero status unless you are completely honest in your story. And have they been completely honest? Why is it that you've got to read 4 or 5 or 6 books to kind of get the authentic narrative? I don't think a lot of people who wrote these books expected the Russian guy to provide a different version of events, the guy who actually risked his life and actually saved lives. The other thing that I think is very important to note is, and you'll notice this, Stephanie, I don't know if you picked this up, in Krakauer's book about, bear in mind, Krakauer jumped from mountain madness to adventure consultant, and yet in his book he tends to just write about the other team. He doesn't really write too much about his own team. He tends to villainize Boukreev and to some extent Pittman, and they're both on another team. A lot of the focus of his book is on other people in other teams. And yet, Mountain Madness suffered one casualty, Scott Fischer. So what is there to criticize Scott Fischer or that team, given that there was one casualty, and given that their guide did his job and saved lives, right? And then you've got Krakauer, who's on the Mountain Madness team, and they've got quite a few people who died on their team, and some of those people who died are right next to, I won't say right next to the journalist's tent, but they're certainly very close to the journalist's tent. It's just around the corner, sort of 10 minutes away, 15 minutes away. And the question is, can you help us? I'm from another team, but 2 of your teammates are out there. Do you want to go and help them? No. I'm going to write a story rather about what your team did and what you did. That's going to be my story. His team lost nearly all members. Yeah. So that's really it in a nutshell. So despite Scott Fischer's mistakes, that's what I opened this up with. Despite Scott Fischer making these 5 crucial errors, in the end, the only one who really paid for them was him, although there were some very close calls. Pittman just survived. So there were definitely, Lean Gamelgard had to be rescued and so on, but his team made it. Stephanie says also Krakauer was listening to the radio in his tent, listening to what was going on, and not doing anything, probably taking notes for his book. Yeah. Snorky Low, I saw an interview with Mike where he was presented as a hero. I was puzzled. Who did he save? He abandoned Beck and Yasuko and just walked with Lean and Clev. Mike had lost, I think, a toe previously, or had lost something in a previous frostbite incident. In my book, Neverest 3, I actually dealt with Beidelman and Groom as almost like, if you say Krakauer versus Pittman or Fischer versus Hall. When I say versus, I'm basically just saying, let's compare them. Let's compare what they did on the mountain. And So I compared Beidelman to Groom, and I personally found that a very interesting story just because no one's done it. No one really took it from that particular perspective. And every time you change perspective, you see things in a different way that really helps. Another reason why this reminds me so much of true crime is you've got to do so much digging. You've got to second guess and kind of keep track of information, because if you don't, you end up with a story that's sort of glossing over, and it's just not. In other words, you've got to interrogate and second guess and cross-examine to get the information. Why is that? Why is it like kind of like a court case? Why are there different versions? I think because the fact is some people aren't proud of what happened, and I think some people have sort of said it, but I think it's part of the untold story that most of it is about, well, you know what, a tragedy happened, but I summited Everest and my ledge is clean. Scorp, I'm late to the party. You're very late. In fact, you're 5 minutes from the end of this podcast. I don't know if you've got any questions. Beidelman, yeah, that's a good point. Snorky, you really know this story well. Beidelman took Yasuka off Mike's hands to allow Mike to continue short roping Beck. I mean, that's the other side, is that Beck was short roped. One thing I don't appreciate with Beck Weathers is the whole thing, I was left for dead. Beck's whole scenario is very unfortunate, but Beck saying that, it's almost like Beck Weathers was saying Rob Hall told him to stay where he was. And so it's almost like it's no one's fault, or he was just following orders. He was just waiting for Rob Hall. Meanwhile, one after the other climber is coming down. And if Beck Weathers just went down with the other climbers, he would be one less climber to worry about. And maybe Yasuka number would have been saved. So Beck Weathers really, he's a kind of a, I really think he was totally miscast in Everest. If anything, he was the most miscast person, I think, in that film, because Josh Brolin is very charismatic. He seems like a very strong fellow. And, I don't know, in terms of Beck Weathers, there was one scene in the movie where I don't know if it's true, but what is dramatized there, so much of that film is true, so one's tempted to think most of it's true, if not all of it's true. But, and I was surprised by that. I was surprised that they got so much right. I was also surprised that he rejected Krakauer's narrative. I thought, wow, that's certainly not a good business move, but I think it's quite an authentic approach in terms of what he was trying to do. But there's a scene that he dramatizes where Beck stumbles on a ladder in the icefall, in the Kumba icefall. And then when he sort of recovers himself, he shouts at Rob Hall something like, I'm paying you to get me safely to the summit, or something like that. I'm not paying for this. And what that scene is just trying to show is the pressure that was on, for example, Rob Hall, not just from one client, but from lots of these people, plus you had a journalist. I'm paying you for, and it's a lot of money. And can they deliver? And there's a lot of pressure when it's a climber who's struggling. And Beck Weathers would ultimately struggle a heck of a lot. Beck Weathers was almost like a Dale Cruz. Beck Weathers had eye surgery, and apparently this had caused him a problem much higher up. But as a doctor, shouldn't he have been able to predict that? So in the same way that Top Shed didn't want to cash in his chips and turn around, there were a lot of others that should have done the same thing. And also, when the SHIT did hit the fan, that was the time to man up and say, let's help out our fellow climbers. So you need to be a man to say, I can't do this, in a certain situation. I can't climb the mountain. I can't do this. This is my personal summit. But you also need to be a man to say, someone's in trouble. I have the capacity to help. Not just me. There's a bunch of us that are available. We have the capacity to help. Let's at least go and see our fellow climber there. So one thing that struck me when I wrote the book K2, dealing with the 2008 disaster on K2, which kind of shocked me, was I realized I really don't like a lot of, it's not that I don't like them. It's not like that I say, okay, you, I don't like you, you, I don't like you. It's just that I didn't really find very many people likable in the 96th Everest disaster. Whereas on K2, I found so many of them to be strong, inspiring, positive, friendly people. I don't know, it's just difficult to say. The climbers on K2 seemed like good people, and the tragedy seemed almost so much worse because of that. They just seemed like really good people. There was nothing wrong with their preparation. There was nothing wrong with their approach. And so again, the question was, what happened there? Was it the weather there or human error? What went wrong on K2 when the problem wasn't personalities fighting? What was going on there? And the weird thing was you had a similar situation again with someone this time blogging about climbing K2. When you say is it a racial consideration, are you talking about abandoning Yasuka? Personalities do make a difference, and I do think personalities played a big role. And I think one of the big ways personalities played a role was when you look at, and it's a approach that I'm not sure too many people have asked about. What was the psychology or the personality of the entire adventure consultants? What was the psychology of the approach of Mountain Madness? And a lot of that was based on the team leaders. And they were quite different. The one team leader was meticulous and careful, and you could say kind of controlling. And you could say the other one was casual and independent and happy-go-lucky. And, you could also make the argument, what if both teams had the same leadership, both controlling or both casual? What would have happened? I think that's also quite an interesting thing to talk about. And then there's also the Sherpas. What impact did the Sherpas have peripherally and kind of globally? And they definitely did have an impact. And so it's fascinating looking at it from all of these different perspectives. If Ang Dorje did fix the ropes, if he did have rope with him, what would have happened? If Lobsang wasn't the Sirdar, or if he wasn't short roping, if he was up in front, what would have happened? I noticed that opposite team members called Beck by his name, and Yasuka just Japanese girl, perhaps due to a lack of networking prior to the summit bid. I think, just to be fair, although I don't like saying it in this way, but Yasuka was struggling. She needed help up the Hillary step. That's something that Krakauer notes, and one wonders why, whenever you know some of this information, when you spent enough time with it, and you sort of wonder, why did you say that? Why are you bringing her up? So anyway, Yasuka was also quite small, and I think she was, not that that makes a difference, but I get the feeling a smaller body, a smaller person. So you could generalize that and say a woman would probably get hypothermia or would feel the cold quicker than a man. Someone might argue and say, no, a woman would have more body fat or something like that. But the fact that a woman's body is smaller, I think, means that it can actually chill quicker. It's how quickly that the core actually gets cold. The extremities, yes, but also the core. And bear in mind, if you just take a woman's hands are often slight and smaller than a man, so they could also get frostbitten perhaps easier. And I think that is a little bit of a factor. But I also think the fact that Yasuko herself couldn't communicate so well with other climbers, that creates a barrier where they don't necessarily know what she's going through. And even if she is talking to them, they may not be able to understand. It's like she's talking to them and it's English, but they can't quite make out what it is, in the same way that Anatoly was saying, I'm quite petite and I'm freezing all of the time. Yeah. Loris says, I'm glad you're finding it fascinating, Loris. Something I mentioned to a friend of mine, I don't know how scientific this is, but when I was climbing Kilimanjaro, it was freezing cold. Bear in mind, Kilimanjaro is on the tropics. It was freezing cold. Heidi says, I have to go get shot. Number 2 now. Oh, good luck with that shot, and let us know how that goes. I think I'm going to wrap this up in the next 10 minutes anyway. I've got to say, I've thought about Everest. I've obviously thought about climbing it, and I think the reason I'd be a bad candidate for Everest is I've got pretty bad sleep apnea. So that to me is the worst thing. Someone might say, actually, you'll be fine because you're going to have chronic sleep deprivation the last 2-3 days anyway. So if you've got experience with sleep deprivation, you'll kind of be fine. That's maybe the counter to it. But I've spent quite a lot of time in tents camping and on mountains camping, and I don't know, I just don't find it fun. I don't find sleep deprivation and being outside fun. It's okay being a little bit, but beyond a certain point, it's really not fun at all, and especially struggling to sleep in those conditions. I'd be analyzing everyone's thoughts and actions. I would like to climb Aconcagua, and I wouldn't mind suffering a bit with that. So I actually wouldn't mind climbing to 7,000 meters and maybe trying 8 if 7 goes okay, but not really going higher than that. But I am very aware that my sleep apnea is pretty bad, and I think that could be a serious problem, because it's something that I feel like I can't. It's becoming quite a serious problem. I don't know whether being physically exhausted would necessarily take it away, just because part of my sleep apnea, I think, is from having a mind that can become very active and then it won't settle down. And on a mountain, I think that can be horrible. If I was younger, though, the same year that the first South African, and it was actually a woman, so the first South African to summit Everest is actually a woman. If I was younger, I think I would have stood a much better chance. But the year that she summited, I was climbing Kilimanjaro, and I didn't have $60,000. So sleep deprivation is used as a torture technique. It's no joke. Yeah, I mean, I've had sleep deprivation so bad that I've honestly felt like I'm going to have a heart attack. I've had serious chest pains, really no joke. And it's not happened once, it's happened quite often. So, yeah. Guys, I think that's it. I'll stay on for a couple more questions. Are there any more questions on... Yeah, Stephanie says you up many all-nighters. The fact that I'm sometimes trying to keep up with American cases, whether it's the Durst case or breaking news in America, means I'm up when America's up often. and sometimes you are up 4, 5, 6 hours past your bedtime, and when you do that a lot, it compounds. So just on something like sleep deprivation on Everest, you can have a compounding effect just on that area. It can be really, really dangerous, I think. Robert Durst, did you know, Candy, that the Durst case is back in court? What time is it in South Africa? It's 10 past 10. I think your research should have persuaded you enough not to want to go to Everest to summit. It sort of did. I can tell you, when I climbed Kilimanjaro, up until I climbed Kilimanjaro, I kind of had this romance, this idea of that I wanted to kind of become an Anatoly. I wanted to climb Annapurna and Dholagiri, and I was reading all those books, and it seemed really romantic, and it seemed really heroic. And when I climbed Kilimanjaro, it was so miserable. You know, what I'll never forget, it's like something that I thought about 5 minutes ago. It's so present in my mind. But I remember walking along the rim of the volcano of Kilimanjaro, high above the clouds, stupendous views around you, just the kind of thing that you feel like very few human beings have experienced. Obviously, it's thousands, but it's just quite an incredible thing. And I could just sort of imagine a bubble, like a space helmet around me, and it would be like being on some planet far away, because there's just gas and dirt and cloud. And at the same time that it was visually so arresting, I just didn't really care. I really didn't give a shit. I just and that made me think. So why would you want to go another kilometer higher and another kilometer higher? It just really was miserable. It's not just that, you also feel sick. I had a splitting headache. I was burping and something else. It just wasn't good. That's a part that I think a lot of climbers don't mention. Another part on Everest is inside those tents, you're going to be covered in a layer of like ice needles. So it's literally like being inside a freezer, which is exactly what you are. How fun is that? I mean, how fun is it? I mean, if you literally now could step into your freezer and sit there for 10 hours, how fun would that be? Well, that's what it's like being on a mountain, except you're on a mountain. Thank you, everyone, for another enjoyable and enlightening time. Take care and see you all soon. See you, Barbara. Thanks for being here. Stephanie, I've always wanted to go to Connecticut, since my co-author is also from there. Just a beautiful area. It's got dare I say, it's got a fairy tale feel about it. Okay, I'm here for last questions, last comments. Yeah, it sounds awful. Mazoka says, go to bed, get some sleep. My bedtime, if you really want to know, is about 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. That's how out of whack my sleep cycle is at the moment. So I'm not, even though it's really late, I'm not going to be going to bed anytime soon. Do you go to sleep at 3 a.m., Stephanie? Timmy's not actually sleeping there. I don't know if he'll come if I call him. Timmy, come. Come, boy. Timmy, come. Now, my sleep time has been about 4 o'clock, but it's now, I mean, last night was actually particularly terrible. Last night was around about 5. And so the question is, do I push it forward or do I try and bring it back? But because it's winter, I don't mind actually sleeping through the morning because it's cold and so on. Scorp says, I've been listening to you for 2 years now. Your channel's done well. Yeah, no, it's good to see that it's still growing. Bria Lace, I'm such a night hawk too. You mean a night owl? Yeah, I must say, when you take Amazon and Patreon and YouTube, it's gratifying to see. I was quite dismissive of YouTube and quite cynical about it, and it's actually, I think it's been certainly quite interesting. I see there's another channel out there that I often refer to that doesn't seem to be growing more than it was for a while. I think because he's staying on one particular topic. Have you sought medical attention for the insomnia? Um, Sort of. I actually went to the doctor not long ago, and she was writing down a prescription, and I stopped her and I said, look, I do sometimes take antihistamines, not for hay fever, but because they make me drowsy. And she said, oh, that's fine, you can do that. And I think she was going to prescribe Somnol, but I also did say to her, I prefer not to take sleeping pills because they're addictive and they chew away your brain stem. Some of them do. So, yeah, try melatonin. I've heard about that. What I find works very well is a glass of red wine very quickly. So you sort of pour a glass of red wine and you drink it in one gulp, and then for 10 minutes your brain just clears, and then you can sleep to some extent in that. Hay fever tabs work for me too. Do you guys want to do a live on the Durst case? Stay away from meds for sure. We can definitely do it live on the Durst case. It's quite interesting them saying that the defense case was that he's innocent because he doesn't have a motive. And if you take that argument across Susan Berman, Kathy, and Morris Black, did he not have a motive in all three of them? It's just quite interesting. Stephanie says, me, anyone else? Okay, so we can maybe definitely talk about Durst. I think we've sort of covered the Everest disaster quite well. If you're interested in more, there are audiobooks on Patreon. There are the 3 books I've written: Everest, Everest 2, Everest 3, K2, and my book on the Swiss climber Uli Steck is also quite an interesting book. Snorky says, let's do more on Everest. Snorky, what do you want to talk about on Everest? I know there's a lot to talk about, but specifically, what do you want us to talk about? We could do a review of the Everest film, kind of go through that. I'm just trying to think of some of the material we've covered in. So what I am prepared to do is we could do the 5 biggest mistakes by Rob. That's a good point. Let me think about that. But can you also think about that? Give me 1 or 2. I'm definitely going to have to think about that. I'm just trying to think the thing I want to talk about maybe we can do the 5 mistakes by Rob, as well as the 2016. The casualty, the South African girl who died in 2016. That's a very, very sad story. They actually did a special on it on 60 Minutes just now, so you can actually watch that on YouTube. Just Google Everest 60 Minutes, you might find it. Okay, guys, I think I'm gonna skedaddle. What is happening on Everest now? You can go to Alan Arnett. It's Alan with 1 L and then Arnett, ARNETTE.com, and click on 2021 coverage. You can also look at the hashtag Everest 2021 on Twitter. You might find some stuff there. Okay, guys. I'm considered petite, moved to Hawaii because I was tired of being cold all the time in Oregon. There you go. Okay. Okay, guys, good to see you, and I'll see you guys live next Saturday about this time, and we'll be talking Durst and Everest, probably in that order. Okay. Thank you for being here. Thank you to those who contributed. Thank you for the moderating. Stephanie, thanks very much again for being here. Thanks for posting those links to some of the books. Remember, we are on Patreon at patreon.com/TCRS. Okay, guys, thanks a lot. See you guys next time.